Hi, I'm Alex Gossi with Magically Resin. I'm collaborating with Craft Resin to offer you some ideas for supplemental income that you can use alongside your existing resin business. I love using permanent vinyl with all kinds of different resin projects. I think it offers a unique opportunity to add glitter and all kinds of interesting things into the spaces that are cut out, and I'm going to show you how I do it today. I start off with a permanent vinyl that I think will be complementary to my project, and then I design the design that I want to use in Cricut Design Space. I then set up my Cricut with the appropriate cutting setup, and there are a ton of videos all over YouTube that offer a much deeper insight into how to use a Cricut and the settings and all of that. This is just a cursory idea to give you an idea of something that I think is a fantastic supplemental income. It is pretty easy when you're cutting out one design to go ahead and cut out 2 or 3 and then pop those up on your Etsy for sale. And when somebody doesn't have a Cricut, they would be thrilled to purchase your neat design that's already cut and ready to go that they can then add to their resin projects. Now, I will be the first to admit that I am no master at this. There's probably people that will watch this that do weeding all the time that are cringing at how I'm doing this, but it gets the job done. And what I actually really wanted you to see is that I'm no master at this. So it's pretty easy to do. And if you're not trying to keep the weeded parts to be able to use them after the fact, really, this isn't that hard. I like leaving it on the mat, and then I like turning the mat upside down to pull the vinyl off so that it doesn't get all bent and curled. Then I use a carrier sheet that these can be purchased as a particular item, or you can use a low tack tape. There's a lot of different ways, depending on how intricate your design is, to transfer the design. And I make sure and burnish it on both sides so that it adheres really well to whatever it is that I'm using as a transfer sheet. And then I like to pull it up with the paper really folded over tightly on itself, so that the design is the most likely to release. These are all just tips that I've seen other people do. Again, I am no master at this, but if you are interested in making really intricate and fancy designs, there are so many videos out there to do this. This is mostly how it relates to resin. Then I center the vinyl piece wherever it is that I'm wanting to put it on my resin piece. It doesn't have to be centered, but I wanted this piece to be centered. And you want to try and make sure and not have it touch down anywhere because it's very sticky. And once it touches down, it's difficult to get it to come back up. So I'm careful not to touch it down until I have it exactly where I want it. And I could have done ruler measurements and I could have been more precise, but since the piece I was putting it on was a geode, it was more important to me how it looked than that it be actually physically centered well. So I really just went by feel, and I do that a lot. I thankfully have a very good eye for such things, and most of the time where I put things looks pretty good. At least I think so. I adhered the vinyl to a piece of resin that I poured a few weeks ago that was just a scrap piece of resin. I was trying out a new alcohol ink technique for smoke, and I liked the way the technique turned out, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this coaster until I decided to do this tutorial, and I thought it would be perfect for an inlay because it has a really neat effect, but it's mostly clear with just a little bit of smoky. So I use my fingers to make sure that it's really attached to the resin because I don't want any seepage underneath it. So I want to make sure that all of that adhesive is attached down. And I also don't want there to be any chance that it comes up when I dome it. Some of you might recognize this technique. I picked this up from Leah Dia, who does all kinds of wonderful techniques and has a ton of great ideas. And I mixed Duraclear with glitter. And I really like the effect once it dries. The Duraclear dries clear, and then all you see is the glitter, and it gives it a beautiful frosted effect. And I'm using iridescent glitter, so it also gives it an iridescent shine. I will have links to all of the materials that I used during this tutorial in the section below. So now I want to make sure that this is the right consistency. I'm going to paint it on, but I want it to be really thick. I want it to be somewhere close to not quite toothpaste, but more pasty than painty. And you can see how thick it is on the brush because the vinyl is very thin, so it creates a reservoir, but you have to be really careful not to paint inside. Anything in it that is too liquidy is going to go over the sides. So it's really important, and this is a practice thing. The more you practice, the easier it is. Also, you can use different items to make a taller piece that you're painting into. Like you can use puff paint and stuff like that. I'll make other videos about those ideas because I do that kind of thing a lot. So vinyl is very low. So you need to make sure once you're painting inside that it's very thick, what you're putting in there, and that it's not runny. Because if it's runny, it's just going to run into the other holes, and that is not going to accomplish what you want to do. If you find that you're having trouble with it being too runny, just add more glitter. You can also add mica powder, which is what I'm doing in the second one. I really love black glitter, but I wanted it to be very, very charcoal feel with glitter in it additionally. I didn't want there to be any light that came through it. So because this coaster is so translucent and because the center is so translucent, I wanted this part to be like stone. So I used Craft Resin's black mica powder, which I put in a separate container because I use this every day. And Duraclear again. I'm mixing the Duraclear, the glitter, and the mica so that it will be there won't be any light that comes through, but that you will still see the sparkle of the glitter. And I like this actually frequently to use with glitter when I'm using a darker colored glitter, because if you don't get good coverage, you might be able to see through the glitter, and you can fix it by going back and painting over it, but I don't want to have to do that. So by adding just a little bit of mica powder to it, it fills in visually any gaps that the glitter might leave on its own. So this is a good trick with darker glitter whenever you want to do this type of technique. Or if you really don't want any light to come through, you want it to be very opaque. So again, my mixture is going to be really thick and pasty. I do not want this to run at all because the black would definitely show if it ran over the sides of any of the vinyl. And the spaces that I'm doing with this black are really intricate and small. You'll see here in a minute that I pull out my flashlight because I realized that it is so intricate that even with the sunshine lighting that I have in my studio, it really wasn't quite bright enough for me to see the edge of the vinyl. And it's so important with this, way more important with the white, because you would hardly notice if you missed a space with the white. But with the black, you'll definitely notice, and you'll see at the end when I show you the piece why that is so important. I'm going to move into a time lapse as I do this piece because I'm doing exactly the same thing that I did the first time. You see the thick consistency, and I am very meticulously painting this in. And one of the benefits of Duraclear is that you can clean it up as you go. So I really like how easy and versatile. Basically, this is creating your own paint, and I love it. I do this technique all the time. I just think it's fantastic. And it works particularly well if you have any type of edge that holds in the liquid. And you could do this, all of this glitter technique could be done with resin as well. On a small project like this, especially if you have craft resin, which has a really good long working time, which I love, then craft resin would be perfect for doing this too. As it turned out, I had a bunch of other projects that I was working on at the same time that I was working on this, and it just made more sense for me to do this with DuraClear. But either works great, and in fact, if you do it with resin, you'll see that the black is a little cloudy right now, and you'll notice at the end that it's not cloudy at all. It is very onyx colored. That's because the DuraClear has a milky white color like most glue does, like school glue, but then it dries clear. So doing this with resin would actually offer being able to do it and have it look exactly like it would look for the finished product, which is a real advantage. So for me, it depends on how large a project I'm doing and how many projects I'm doing as to whether I mix the glitter with resin or with DuraClear. Now I'm going to set this aside and let it dry for 24 hours before I do the dome coat. I've prepared my resin and let it sit for a good long time to get nice and thick. I don't have very much in the glass, and I like to dome more than one project when I dome, so the other coaster is just one that needed a dome on it. But since I was here, it makes good sense. I like for my resin to be a nice thick honey consistency before I start to dome so that most of the resin will stay on top, and I like to put it on a Lazy Susan so that I can turn it and make sure that all of the edges get coated, which is particularly important with the Geo one that I'm doing next to it because it has an inside edge and an outside edge, and it's easy to miss an edge, and it's annoying to have to go back and dome something a second time because you didn't get a perfect dome. So I like a really thick resin for this, and craft resin is going to be different for everybody depending on the temperature of your room and how much resin is in your cup. But a rule of thumb for me, and there are a bunch of videos that go into this that I've made just recently, but I like for it to be 95 degrees before I introduce A and B, measured equally by volume, and then I mix it for 7 minutes, and then I leave it for 10 minutes for a regular pour, but I leave it longer than that for a dome pour, and I'm looking for it to be warmer than 110, and I want it to be a honey consistency. It's very important with this type of project to make sure and get lots of resin on top of the glittered area. While the glitter is held in by a glue substance, the DuraClear, or resin itself, it still can be bumpy and there can be opportunity for bubbles. So make sure that you get a really good thick layer of resin, and you might even need to leave a little bit of resin in your cup and let it sit for a little bit longer for it to really thicken up, because you want to make sure that the part that has the glitter on it that's raised really gets thick resin on top of it and gets all the resin that it needs. And you can always go back and do an additional dome coat if you need to, and depending on how thick the layer is on top, you might have to. I don't show it here, but I always torch anything that I dome like this. A torch is just a much better way to go, and it doesn't blow the resin around. And I do not spray them with alcohol because I do not want to thin out the resin on top. I thank you so much for spending your precious time watching my tutorials, and I love all the wonderful feedback. Thank you so much for participating, and if you have any ideas or any questions, please be sure and leave them in the comments below. Oh, and subscribe if you like what we're doing. Thanks!